Welcome back to A Year of Final Fantasy, and we are still in the month of Leviathan, and today we're going to step away from the Final Fantasy tropes for a bit and focus on the great people that make the Final Fantasy franchise, especially that make it what it's become today. And our focus right now is going to be on Yoshitaka Amano, one of the lead illustrators of this series. So for the remainder of this video, I'm just going to be showing you the great prints that this artist has made. Amano first got his start as a fantasy illustrator in the beginning due to his fascination with reading superhero comics from the Western world. He got his first real start as a character designer for some early superhero anime with Tekka the Space Knight, Neo-Human Kashern, and Science Ninja Team Kachaman. However, in the early 80s, he began to illustrate novels, one of which include the Gaien Saga and the ongoing Vampire Hunter D series, in which he still does today. Also in the 80s, he joined this little-known company. You may have heard of it. It's called Square. So, Yoshitaka Amano has been with Square ever since the first Final Fantasy. The interesting thing about Amano is how his works are incorporated into the franchise, especially going from the very beginning with Final Fantasy 1 all the way up until now with Final Fantasy 15. In the beginning, he was the primary designer not only of the characters but of the logo, and he was given the title of graphic designer as well. Throughout the entire series, he has been the main designer for the logo of Final Fantasy. However, his role has shifted from character designer to a general image illustrator, while Tetsuya Nomura mostly overtook with the character design roles about the time that Final Fantasy VII came out. We will eventually cover Nomura and his works later, but let's just stick with Amano right now. As the franchise progressed, Amano started developing illustrations of the characters and games in a general sense, with his very particular stylistic way. Whenever I've seen a person stumble upon Amano's works, they're usually kind of taken aback by them because most of the more recent and well-known characters and games look really nothing like Amano's works. However, if you start delving back into the franchise's past, and especially with the character portraits before Final Fantasy VII, let's say, you're gonna really see his style shine through in the games themselves. One thing Amano is known for most prominently, though, is the logos of each particular game. It's one of the first things that anyone sees whenever they show off the game, and it's the most impressive part. It's just really astounding how he can encapsulate much of the game's entire story just in one singular image. I intend to do a video specifically focusing on each logo and how it relates to the games themselves, so I won't really go much more into it right this second, but since we're talking about Amano right now, it just has to be mentioned. Apart from the logos in the early games, Amano does take more of a backseat role after Nomura took over the character designs. That being said, he still contributes to every game and has input about the designs, specifically of the main characters. Amano focuses mostly on producing character artwork in his trademark style throughout the entire series. While you may see Cloud and you may not see a lot of Amano's influence on what Cloud looks like, even though he does have influence, you can definitely see his particular take on Cloud in certain illustrations that he's made for, in this case, Final Fantasy VII. Speaking of Amano's style, he focuses mostly on printmaking rather than hand-drawn illustrations for the specific aspects of media that he covers. Printmaking involves creating specific types of media such as wood and, in these days, usually like metal plates, that'll transfer ink onto a page, and then what he does with that, to color it up, he will use acrylics, which will give you a kind of watercolory effect without actually using watercolors. Now, I'm not a big art person, and I don't really want to go more in depth with that because I'm afraid I might say something wrong, but this printmaking is just very, very different than a person that you might think would just be a regular illustrator, maybe drawing like a comic book or something like that. And I also read up on printmaking that a lot of people, especially in Japanese cultures, they will make their print on a metal sheet and then do a particular amount of runs, let's say like maybe 5,000 runs, and they will actually destroy that metal sheet print so nobody can make an authentic print of it again. It'll just be a copy. So that was something that I found that was pretty interesting that I had no idea about. So Amano's prominence in culture is absolutely due to the influence that Final Fantasy as a franchise has had on the world over, and he has done work outside of the franchise. Recently, he's illustrated Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, The Dream Hunters. He has illustrated for Elektra and Wolverine the Redeemer, and he actually has his own hero series. He still dabbles in anime, and actually the most interesting part that I've found, completely unrelated to his art, but just related to him himself, is that he's actually appeared as a person named Hiroshi in the movie New Rose Hotel, so he's actually done a little bit of acting, if I'm reading this right. Anyway, we learn something new every day, right? So if you enjoyed these pictures I've shown you and you appreciate this type of surreal art, there's a fantastic slipcase of 3 hardcover books known as The Sky, which features lavishly huge prints of his art. There's also a more recently released paperback book which contains much of Amano's work in general, not necessarily focusing on Final Fantasy like the previously mentioned Sky books do. I personally love Amano's art, and I think it really adds something just surreal to the Final Fantasy franchise. It's mind-bending to look at these more stylized approaches to the game, and as a person who I'll completely freely admit I don't know or appreciate much art like this, I do feel Amano's work allows me to appreciate art through this bridge that is video games and the Final Fantasy franchise. So I think that's it for today's episode. We actually have 2 episodes left in this month of Leviathan, and we're going to be looking at the main game in the next video, and that's Final Fantasy IV and its many incarnations. And to actually end off the month, like I said at the beginning, we're going to be talking about its sequel, Final Fantasy IV: The After Years. So if you enjoy my work, please consider spreading it around, subscribing. We're still a super tiny channel, but hopefully with your help we can grow with a fantastic community. Check out my other videos on the channel, and we do have a bi-weekly Crystal Keep podcast. If anyone's interested in guest starring, shoot me a message. Regardless, I appreciate you watching this all the way until the end, and taking this crazy Final Fantasy journey with me. So until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming.